So Ben runs the paper for a while, and then, quote, my brother's discharge from jail was accompanied with an order, and a very odd one, that, quote, James Franklin should no longer print the newspaper called the New England Courant. On consultation held in our printing office among his friends what he should do in this conjuncture, it was proposed to elude the order by changing the name of the paper. But my brother, seeing inconveniences in this, came to a conclusion as a better way to let the paper in the future be printed in the name of Benjamin Franklin, in Ben's name, in order to avoid the censure of the Assembly that might fall on him as still printing it. He contrived and consented, so what they end up doing is they give him his old indenture. So Ben's running the paper now. So his old indenture is gone, signed away and given to Ben. And they sign a new one which is kept private. There's a flimsy scheme, he says. However, it was immediately executed, and the paper was printed accordingly under my name for several months. At length, a fresh difference arising between my brother and me, I took upon me to assert my freedom, presuming that he would not venture to produce the new indentures. It was not fair in me to take this advantage, and this I therefore reckon as one of the first errata of my life. I don't know if you could blame a man for anything he did to get out from under physical abuse. I just can't think of anything I'd blame a man for. Murder? Yeah. To get out from under physical abuse? Yeah, you could. Murder's too much. The fairness of it weighed little with men when the impression of resentment for the blows his passion too often urged him to bestow upon me. See there? Though he was otherwise not an ill-natured man, perhaps I was too saucy and provoking. But there it is. He says that, the unfairness of it weighed little with me. He says, I don't care if it's unfair that I venture out and call him and say, I'm not indentured, I'm leaving. And he's like, wait a minute, what about those private indentures we signed? He doesn't care. When he found that I would leave him, he took care to prevent my getting employment in any other printing house of the town by going round and speaking to every master, who accordingly refused to give me work. I then thought of going to New York, as the nearest place where there was a printer, and I was rather inclined to leave Boston when I reflected that I had already made myself a little obnoxious to the governing party. And from the arbitrary proceedings of the Assembly in my brother's case, it was likely that I might, if I stayed, soon bring myself into scrapes. Right? There's no freedom of speech or anything here. If he keeps smarting off, they're going to put him in jail. And further, that my indiscreet disputations about religion began to make me pointed at with horror by good people as an infidel and atheist. I concluded, therefore, to remove to New York. But my father now siding with my brother, I was sensible that if I attempted to go openly, by means it would prevent me. So he contrives with Collins, his friend, to get on a sloop and go to New York, and they're going to do it secretly. I sold my books to raise a little money, was taken aboard the sloop privately. We had a fair wind, and 3 days found ourselves in New York. I found myself in New York, near 300 miles from my home, at the age of 17, in October 1723, without the least recommendation or knowledge of any person in the place, and very little money in my pocket. Chapter 2. The inclination I had had for the sea was by this time done away, or I might now have gratified it. But having another profession, and conceiving myself a pretty good workman, I offered my services to a printer of the place, old Mr. William Bradford, who had been the first printer in Pennsylvania, but had removed thence in consequence of a quarrel with the governor, George Keith. Now, he could give me no employment. Quote, my son at Philadelphia has lately lost his principal hand, though, Aquila Rose, by death. If you go thither, I believe he may employ you. End quote. Philadelphia was 100 miles further. I set out, however, in a boat for Amboy, leaving my chest and things to follow me round by sea. In crossing the bay, we met with a squall that tore our rotten sails to pieces, preventing our getting into the Kill, and drove us up upon Long Island. and there was a drunken Dutchman, and he was abusive, and he fell out, and they dragged him back in. We were soon almost as wet as he was, because a storm came and we all had to go down inside the holds of the ship, and they spent a lousy night, and it was raining, and they were all wet, cold. It rained hard all the next day, and then they landed in this little place, and they thought they had passed Philadelphia, so they made camp for the night, and they were going to go back up. The next morning, they go out onto the water, and they see Philadelphia just right down the way. So they go on down to Philadelphia and arrived there about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock on the Sunday morning, and landed at Market Street Wharf. He walked towards the top of the street, gazing about until near Market Street, when I met a boy with bread. I had often made a meal of dry bread, and inquiring where he had bought it, I went immediately to the baker's he directed me to. I asked for biscuits, meaning such as we had in Boston. That sort, it seems, was not made in Philadelphia. I then asked for 3-penny loaf, and was told they had none. Not knowing the different prices, nor the names of different sorts of bread, I told him to give me 3-penny worth of any sort. He gave me accordingly 3 great puffy rolls. I was surprised at the quantity, but took it, and having no room in my pockets, walked off with a roll under each arm, and eating the other. Thus I went up Market Street as far as 4th Street, passing by the door of Mr. Reed, my future wife's father, when she, standing at the door, saw me, and thought I made a most awkward, ridiculous appearance. He hadn't showered, he hadn't bathed, he had just got off this boat, there was a wreck, a night with the wind and rain and stuff and everything. He's tired, and before that he had just gotten into New York, and from there Philadelphia, and yeah, he was not a pretty sight. And this girl sees him walking by with 2 loaves of bread under his arms and eating a 3rd loaf, and he's impervious, he doesn't know, and she thought he was quite a sight. She married him later. Then I turned and went down Chestnut Street and part of Walnut Street, eating my roll all the way, and coming round, found myself again at Market Street Wharf, near the boat I came in, to which I went for a draught of the river water, and being filled with one of my rolls, gave the other 2 to a woman and her child that came down the river in a boat, and thus were waiting to go, and with us, and were waiting to go further. So he gives his bread away. How sweet. Now he starts walking and gets up in a big procession of people. He's on the street somewhere, just walking around, and there's a bunch of people going the same direction. And he just walks with them, and they all are turning and they're going into church. And he goes into a Quaker assembly house. And he sits down, and they start doing their speech or whatever, preaching, and he very quickly falls asleep. So he falls asleep in a Quaker church, and when the proceedings were done, someone was kind enough to wake him. Then he found a place to stay that night. And the next day, he dressed himself as neat as he could, and went to Andrew Bradford, the printer. I found in the shop the old man, his father, whom I had seen at New York, and who, traveling on horseback, had got to Philadelphia before me. So, wow, look at that. He took him a while to get to Philadelphia, and the guy he talked to in New York and gave him the recommendation is here in the office when he walks in. He introduced me to his son, who received me civilly, gave me breakfast, but told me he did not at present want a hand, being lately supplied with one. But there was another printer in town lately set up, one Keimer. It's K-E-I-M-E-R. Keimer or Keimer or Kamer, whatever. And this guy might perhaps employ you. The old gentleman said that he would go with me to talk to Keimer, to the new printer, and we found him, and Keimer said that he would employ him, though he had just then nothing to do. So, taking old Bradford, whom he had never seen before, to be one of the townspeople, not a printer from New York or a printer from Philadelphia who had moved to New York, or any special important person, not the father of the person running the other printing office in town. He thinks that Mr. Bradford was just some guy with Ben Franklin. And taking old Bradford, whom he had never seen before, to be one of the townspeople that had a good will for him, right? He thinks this guy's bringing someone, an employee for him, right? He entered into a conversation on his present undertaking